PunPun is a terrible person, and that's not to take away from his character, but he became a terrible person because of his upbringing from a young age. Usually when we read manga, the average mangaka rarely spends 5 chapters or more explaining the main character's childhood, but in this instance, we get a full-blown 30-chapter childhood experience from PunPun, and that's not a coincidence. Inio, which is the mangaka, makes us watch PunPun's life go from bad to worse in his growing years. From the parents being separated to having troubles at school, the environment that PunPun grew up in played a major contributing factor to PunPun having a terrible future ahead. In this video, we will be talking about what makes PunPun such a bad person. And obviously, we have to talk about his parents first of all. What a terrible job both of them did on raising PunPun during his developmental stage in his life. Chapter 1 is when we first meet PunPun and his family. When PunPun's dad is watching a baseball game, all of a sudden he wants some beer. To his own satisfaction, he calls his wife to get it, and in front of PunPun, who is just a child, he starts to scream the most disgusting names at her. PunPun's dad goes on a full-blown rampage as he claims he bought the alcohol with his own money while she was unemployed for a whole year. Just by chapter 1 alone, we can see so much that went wrong. First off is PunPun's dad. He clearly suffers from alcohol abuse and can't live without it, as we see from him going on an outburst in front of PunPun about there being no beer left. And for him to lash out like that is such a serious problem. PunPun had to grow up as a child thinking that this was normal in that house, as this happens so regularly. He must have been used to this behavior and essentially influenced him in his adulthood when he started to get a hold of his own emotions. Now, by the second chapter, we witness more domestic violence in PunPun's home. His father's physical abuse towards his mother became more apparent, leaving PunPun to feel helpless and terrified. This constant exposure to violence teaches PunPun that aggression and abuse are ways to deal with problems, laying a foundation for his troubled behavior in the later years. The normalization of such violence profoundly distorts PunPun's understanding of relationships and conflict resolution, contributing to his destructive tendencies. Me personally, I think the physical abuse goes a long way for PunPun, affecting his adulthood when he later goes on to assault a loved one, just like how his dad did to his mom. This generational conflict gets passed down through physical harm, and it's almost concerning how comfortable both PunPun and his dad are when abusing women in their life. So at the end of the day, it isn't crazy to say that PunPun witnessing physical abuse firsthand led to him committing the same acts of violence. PunPun isn't formally diagnosed with anything, but abusing others later on in the manga is no excuse, and for a lack of better words, pretty disgusting to think that he thought it was okay. With his dad leaving to go to America after assaulting his mom, and PunPun's mom not telling no one about her pain and suffering, it dwelled over PunPun. It's honestly such a shame that a kid had to go through this in such a difficult time throughout his childhood when it comes to his parents. PunPun's parents were supposed to raise him right, but failed because of their acts in the house. PunPun's mother openly admitted to never truly caring for PunPun and was just a shallow version of a terrible father, while the uncle had stepped up as there was no parental figure in PunPun's life. And even then, the uncle had his own side story that opened up the lore about him we never knew. PunPun's life was a disaster at such a young age. It made me realize maybe that's why he turned out to be a monster in his adult life. With trouble at home, PunPun never truly recovered and turned out to be broken because of his broken home. With the family of 3 being split apart, they created depression and anxiety for PunPun, leading him to become cold and isolated with his emotions at a young age, never really truly opening up to the world. I like to think PunPun being quiet stemmed from home not being able to open up to his family when abusiveness was happening inside of his home in Japan. Life in general was hard for him, but when all the smoke settled down, it came time to turn a new leaf to another problem in PunPun's life, which is Aiko. Not to say Aiko was the reason why PunPun was a terrible person, but she definitely added on to his mental health problems without him even noticing. Life goes on in different ways for every person, and for Aiko and PunPun, they ended up going their separate ways after the fact that PunPun had left her waiting to go to Kagoshima. They never really got back to that point in their life where they were both really happy with each other. That innocence had left both of them, creating this division in their relationship. Even after the badminton game where PunPun had the courage to brush Aiko away and told her to go with Takaho, as he needed her more than PunPun had needed Aiko in that moment. Ever since then, PunPun grew up to be silent and went through life day by day in a depressing state. He had actually fallen back in love with Aiko, which is what he thought at that time, just for it to go back to normal. This sure wasn't easy for Aiko to do at that time, but at the end of the day, it's what needed to be done. By meeting Aiko later on in his life, this opened up a new path for PunPun to abuse his powers on someone who isn't as powerful as him, as he did exactly that. PunPun would physically force himself onto Aiko in times where Aiko wasn't that self-conscious about PunPun's ability to harm her, but she couldn't really speak up. PunPun's lack of humanity made him a monster we all knew at the end of the manga. What really gets me upset is at the end, we never see Aiko be truly happy. It was kind of a bumpy road as she got pushed to the end of taking her own life, and PunPun got taken back by Sachi and lived his life like it was normal back then. Meanwhile, Aiko never got a happy ending she truly deserved. It's messed up what happened to both of them. Two adults tried to navigate through Japan with a murder on their hands. Lots of problems had occurred with both people's lives, and essentially caused a real-life power abuse when it came to their relationship. I wish PunPun never harmed Aiko, because that's what made me look at him as a monster in the first place. I understand all of us have influences such as parents, broken relationships, and many more, but in this case, Aiko had the biggest influence on PunPun, but he still had so much time to grow by himself and be a good person. And what he did to Aiko is definitely no excuse for the abuse. With both of them coming back from broken homes, this creates a dent in their relationship of the missing love they needed when they were a child. That then creates a sense of power needed to fill that missing void. With that being said, I don't think PunPun's humanity was lost in the process, but rather I think he should have controlled it for the better, because at the end he ended up manipulating Aiko and turned away from Sachi when she needed him the most. And that was the most hurtful part in the manga, when she was going through a difficult time in her life with her ex-husband and her son, which she was pregnant with, and then she needed somebody to lean on, but PunPun wasn't there. He turned away from Sachi to benefit from his own ideal needs, and Sachi was there for him for almost his entire adulthood. And for him to turn away from Sachi really left a dent in their relationship also, which kind of causes a huge problem. But at the end of the day, Sachi is selfish and not selfish, and ended up taking PunPun back. We kind of see a clear, distinct contrast between the two characters. PunPun being a little selfish and abusing his powers, while Sachi remained firm in what she believed in and not letting PunPun go to shit. I actually believe that PunPun will lead a better life with Sachi. Even if this manga didn't continue, I still would base my theory off of that, just because Sachi is more honed into her feelings compared to Aiko. Aiko was kind of all over the place with her feelings, and that is definitely not her fault, but that's her characteristics. Sachi, on the other hand, she's kind of the opposite of Aiko. She likes to fight, she likes to yell, and don't forget, she likes to boss PunPun around. And I think with both PunPun and Sachi's character dynamics, I think that they can be very compatible. Even though they were very compatible, PunPun just ended up crashing out during the midst of Sachi's crisis with her ex-husband. PunPun had thought to himself that Sachi actually chose the ex-husband over him, and that kind of made him feel worthless. That's why he essentially ran back to Aiko. But Sachi wasn't even trying to display that in the first place. She was trying to convince PunPun she had loved him, but PunPun didn't fall for that. And that also led to him becoming a monster and such a horrible person. You can't expect someone to change overnight, and I get that. But for Sachi to go above and beyond by talking to PunPun about her pregnancy and to leave her ex-husband behind shows her true characteristics and how selfish PunPun is, thinking about himself first. By the grace of the mangaka, thank God PunPun didn't do anything worse to anybody else. He already manipulated Sachi and Aiko's emotions to an extent that one of them took their lives and the other ones had a mental breakdown. I've read many mangas, but PunPun's life is actually much more complex than I've seen throughout any main character essentially. I'd like to say that Goodnight PunPun isn't your regular slice of life or drama manga, but rather it pushes the limits on what it means to be humans and the emotions that come with it. From anger all the way to happiness, Goodnight PunPun actually touches on so much emotions and beyond that by explaining it through the images and text bubbles that go just beyond the pages. So the next time that you have thoughts and emotions that spiral downwards, just remember, it's easy to become a monster like PunPun.